What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Kamen Rider Build. Now, for those of you that are wondering, yes, I am doing a review on Kamen Rider Build, and you may be thinking to yourself, why didn't you do one for X-Aid? The main reason why I didn't do one for X-Aid was because I only, in the past 20 or so episodes of X-Aid, really thought about doing it. At first I was initially just thinking I'm just going to keep on doing Power Rangers and Sentai, but then I realized maybe I should also do Kamen Rider because I've always tried to dabble in it a little bit, even if it's just to announce whatever the next series is. And in this case, I felt like I really kind of wanted to get into it finally because I just, I'm already about halfway through Q Ranger, so I thought might as well do that since I'm doing Ninja Steel and Q Ranger. Why not start Build? So I am going to do reviews of Build, and hopefully this can be a regular thing. I really enjoyed episode 1 a lot. For those that are wondering, I've watched Kamen Rider for years now. As far as ones that I actually watched when they were airing, I mean, I've been watching them since at least maybe since Forze, maybe earlier, but I've kept a pretty consistent thing. I mean, the ones that I would say I really watched as they were airing were Drive, X-Aid, Ghost, Bill, Ghost and Gaiam a little bit, and a couple of others, but I've watched at least half, if not more of them fully, and then some of them I've watched to lesser extents, especially the earlier stuff. It really depends for me, but I've definitely watched a good variety. So I just want to give you guys that background. So the episode is called "These Guys Are a Best Match," and the episode gives some good background as far as what's the context of the situation, what's been going on and everything. So we start off by hearing about that 10 years ago there was a vehicle that landed on Mars an astronaut ended up finding a precious artifact from Mars that is known as Pandora's box. And what happens is that we end up seeing that, and then we end up meeting Himuro Gentaku, who is the Toto Prime Minister aide. And what ends up happening is that he then ends up explaining how there was an incident known as the Skywall incident that was caused by this box. And what had happened is that there's this group that's known as Project Prominence that their whole purpose is to discover the mysteries of outer space. And what happens, and they want to discover it using this box. And what happens is that during the time when the guy that was supposed to announce that they're going to use this box to find out information about outer space, another person decided to come on the premise of where the speech was going on for their use of it, and he ends up putting his hand over the box. The box shoots out a flash of light, and that leads to the Skywall forming, which is this whole entire wall that splits Japan into 3 sections. The 3 sections are in the north, Hokkaido, which is the part of Japan which focuses on social welfare. And you have to remember that each of these different areas are the names that I'm referring to are all their capital cities, because Japan becomes 3 different nations basically that are kind of working together but are also separate. So Hokkaido is the first one, which focuses on social welfare. Sento is the one in the west, which focuses on economic recovery, and Toto, which is the one where Gentaku lives, and where this first episode really takes place in, focuses on traditional pacifism. So, not very big on fighting and stuff like that, as opposed to the other areas which they will fight. So we then end up seeing Utsunami Naraki, who is Gentaku's assistant. And what ends up happening is that there's this guy who is actually Build, but we'll get into it. He is looking around, actually wants to see the Pandora's box, and Gentaku sees him running all around or whatever, and he ends up talking to his assistant, Narikai. If I'm saying it wrong, I know, just bear with me. But anyway, you know, what ends up happening is that he ends up saying that this guy is planning on trying out for a job or whatever, and Gentaku looks at him like he's just this fool. And he says, all right, well, we'll give him some sort of test and we'll see if he can pass it. I'm sure it will be very hard. And, you know, they end up figuring that out. So from there, what ends up happening is that we end up seeing that there's this girl that appears, and she wants to hear you know, an opinion from Gentaku about the recent incidents regarding the monsters and the appearances of the hero known as Kamen Rider. And what happens is that the journalist's name is Takigawa Sawa, and what happens is that Gentaku ends up actually hitting on her, like basically says, "Oh, I'll give you an opinion. Just I'll come over to your hotel later. Don't worry." And she doesn't realize it till like a couple of seconds later that he's basically hitting on her. But then it flashes forward to a few later that night where she's talking to her boss, who's the chief, basically saying that the guy was going to hit on her and how like this is not right, and she wants to learn more about these monsters and the Kamen Rider and all that stuff. And what happens is that suddenly we see a monster. These monsters are known as Smash Monsters. So every one of them is like something Smash or whatever. And what happens is that in this episode, there are two Smash Monsters that we end up getting to see, and the first one that we see, which is the one that actually bumps into Sawa, is the Needle Smash Monster, which is the first one, and is hosted by a certain man. Now I'll get into what I mean by that in a few seconds, because what happens is that she ends up getting knocked out, and suddenly we see Build, who ends up fighting the Needle Smash Monster. And what ends up happening is that he ends up defeating the Smash Monster, holds out one of his bottles, and sucks the essence into the bottle. This bottle we'll get more into a little bit later, but then it's revealed that he has a human form. So basically all these monsters are originally people, and we'll get into the significance of that throughout this episode. It's pretty crazy, to be honest with you, and it's a little surprising that they decided to explain this fairly early on, because it kind of, and we'll get into why I say that later on, because it reminds me of another season that's not that old now, but it's a couple years, when we get to the explanation of why that is the way it is. So what ends up happening is that that monster, you know, gets his essence sucked in, and then we end up seeing Build's dreams, which we end up seeing him remembering being in a human experimentation lab, and also seeing this person who he doesn't know who he is. He refers to him as a Batman, and his actual name, for those that are wondering, is Night Rogue. He'll like actually get his name like officially announced. I mean, said in the show probably in the next couple of episodes, but that is his name technically. And he's an interesting character that I'm sure we'll get to know more of later on. We don't know too much about him. But anyway, what ends up happening is that from there, Build wakes up. He has face paint on himself, and we end up also learning that his name is Kiryu Sento, which we're just gonna call him Sento. And he's part of the Toto Institute Advanced Matters Physics department, and that's the job that he's trying to get, that we saw at the beginning. So he's trying to work through the Toto Institute. And the thing is that we end up seeing that he wakes up, he ends up looking in the mirror, he makes no big deal over all the face paint that's on him, and goes over to his special microwave device, which allows him to turn the bottled essence into a power-up that he can use to swap out his bottles for, because you have to remember the bottles allow him to transform. So he gets this new one. It looks like and apparently it's a hedgehog bottle, and we'll get into that later on. So from there, we end up also getting introduced to two other characters. Those characters are what do you call them? What was her name? Is Tsurugi Misora, who is this girl that apparently has something to do with his ability, Build's ability to take the essence of the Smash monsters and convert them into power-ups that Build can use. But apparently she has something to do with it. She has some sort of power. We don't know exactly what that means, but that is the case. That's what they've already said for a fact, that like she has something to do with his ability to actually convert them. So that is interesting to see. Again, we don't know enough about her, but we'll get into that more later on. Build explains all that stuff, and then Misora ends up falling asleep, and then we end up meeting her father, who is Tsurugi Suichi, who is the Cafe Nasita's owner. So, and that's the name of the Cafe Nasita, is the cafe that he lives in. He doesn't live in the actual cafe area. He lives in the housing section of the cafe, because it's sort of like a combination of like a cafe and also a house. So it's interesting. So what ends up happening is that Sento ends up talking to Tsurugi. Tsurugi ends up asking, does he remember anything new? Because apparently he's actually lost 20 years of his memories due to some experimentations. And what he says is that he remembers having a human experimentation happening, gas masks, and a Batman. That's all he remembers. And the Batman, obviously, again, is supposed to be Night Rogue. So what ends up happening from there is Build ends up talking to what's his name, Suichi, and Suichi ends up telling him that he has plenty of rent that's been built up, because even though Sento has tons of memory loss, he's not just gonna let him go off free. So what ends up happening is that, and that's part of the reason why he has to get this job. So what ends up happening is that Sento ends up using his Build phone and Lion Phobile, and the Lion Phobile allows the Build phone to change into the Machine Builder, which is his vehicle, which is a bike. You know, typically Kamen Riders tend to have bikes. That's his. So Build goes to work. We then end up seeing Banjo Ryoga, who is a pro fighter that we'll get into a little bit later, but basically we end up seeing him running into a sewer. He ends up sneaking around into the Toto Institute. There are some robots that work for the Institute that see him and try to take him out, but he ends up escaping. From there, what ends up happening is that we see Sento talking to Gintaku, and Gintaku mentions how he aced all the tests and everything, and he's pretty much set to get the job. And what happens is, though, Gintaku questions Sento because of the fact that on his resume he says probably A's in probably A's in physics, and the reason why he's curious is because it's like, why would it be that way? And Sento says, because I have amnesia, which makes sense, but it is a little bit like, why would you write probably? Kind of weird. So from there, what ends up happening is that we end up learning from Gintaku more about the Skywall incident, and what we learned this time is that apparently everyone that was at the site of the Skywall incident, when the beam of light appeared, everyone that was in the area gained an aggressive impulse that led to them not just being further divided just because of the wall itself, but also because of their feelings towards each other suddenly became very aggressive, intense, and not so fond of each other. So that led to some sense of separation and less of a desire to work together. So from there, we end up seeing that there's a report going on that talks about Banjo Ryoga. Banjo Ryoga is actually a former pro fighter who ended up being banned from fighting for life because he did some fixing of fights, which led him to not being able to fight anymore. And he also got a 10-year sentence for killing, for murdering a scientist a year prior. So then what happens is that we end up hearing that Suichi is mentioning how it seems like Ryoga might be possibly a Smash monster, but there's no reading so far saying that he is yet. But Suichi basically says it's still good for you to go and check and make sure that he isn't going to become something, because he might be early, but he might end up changing into that form. So Bill goes after, yeah, Sento ends up going after Ryoga. Sento does end up getting into a fight with Ryoga, but then eventually Ryoga explains how he was in jail and a bull guy injected him with some sort of drug or whatever, which knocked him out and led to him getting human experimentations on him as well, similar to Sento. So both of them were left in a similar state where they both were experimented on. And what happens is that Ryoga doesn't know the Batman at all, but we end up seeing that there's another Smash Monster. And again, the Smash Monster names that I said before, like, they don't actually say their names, it's just that's what their names are. Like, the Needle Smash, that's what his name was, like Needle Smash. The other one that was shown in the episode was the Strong Smash, who's just, pure muscle, basically. And what happens is that the Strong Smash ends up fighting Ryoga. And eventually, what ends up happening is that Banjo ends up getting beaten up by the Strong Smash, and then the Strong Smash actually brings him a distance away. Then, following that, Build ends up appearing and ends up fighting the Strong Smash, and he ends up doing his first henshin, which leads to him transforming using the rabbit bottle and the tank bottle, allowing him to transform into his basic transformation mode. He ends up using the Voltec Breaker, which is his weapon and special attack or whatever, and he ends up attacking him. And eventually what ends up happening is that he ends up swapping the rabbit bottle with the hedgehog bottle that he got earlier from battling the Needle Smasher, and he ends up using that, which allows him to have some spiked ball attacks. And eventually he ends up swapping back to Rabbit and Tank, and what happens is that he ends up doing this awesome finisher move that's fairly typical, like a basic really cool Kamen Rider kick. And the thing that's really cool a lot of times is that there's a lot of math information going on, which is fairly similar to W, where, like, W had a big emphasis on being very technical, very wise, smart guys overall. So, very fitting of the character. People have already been associating, Build with W for quite some time, and people are assuming already that they're gonna get Build to do a crossover special with W at some point. Again, it's still up for debate, but it's pretty much assumed that a lot of people are expecting that to happen. What ends up happening, though, following this is we end up seeing the police come. Well, actually, Build ends up taking the bottle, sucking up the essence, and then what ends up happening is that the police come. We see again Taku, who is actually with the police. Banjo is actually he is going to be put in prison again, but what happens is that due to the fact that Banjo actually was was in a similar situation, he doesn't want to just assume things. The other thing to remember that I just forgot to mention is the fact that when they speak to the guy that was in the Smash Monster, actually Banjo actually recognizes him as someone that he knew from the experimentations, which basically leads to them both concluding the fact that maybe all those people that were under the experimentation were originally were all monsters, meaning that that Banjo and Sento were both originally Smash Monsters, or they were meant to be, and maybe we're not sure yet, maybe they were something went wrong, and that led to them being something else, meaning Kamen Riders. Again, hasn't been confirmed for a fact that Banjo is going to be the other Kamen Rider, which is Kamen Rider Claws, but that's what's assumed. But yes, that's what you can basically make the assumption of, that they were experiments that may have not have worked or something like that, or maybe at some point they will. Again, we don't know anything for a fact. Something like this kind of happened with X-A, where X-A was originally thought of as just being different, but then we ended up finding out that he was something else in that show. So it is interesting. It also kind of reminds me a little bit of Gaiam in a way, because like Gaiam had it where, you know, the monsters were originally people, but in that case it was like they just destroyed them. In this case it's like they were able to bring them back to humanity, so it's a little bit different. So from there, you know, Build ends up, you know, Sento and Banjo end up riding off, having to deal with fighting off some enemies, and also they end up using, you know, the machine builder to travel around. Build does all some attacks, and it feels very similar to early Kamen Rider. Eventually, though, the episode ends with Build mentioning how Banjo has his fly open, and then they just kind of joke around. We hear the theme, and then we end up seeing the preview for episode 2, which is pretty good. It basically says like to not give up and not just get arrested, because what's the point of that? And also that Kamen Rider is a fugitive, basically. This also is cool because we also get to see at the end that inside the microwave this time, during the preview, they have like a little bit of a clever thing with the superhero time, where they actually show that inside the microwave this time is actually the Kyotama, which we end up seeing like the Q Rangers appear alongside Build finally, which is cool. So as a whole, I would say that this was a good episode. I know tons and tons and tons of backstory. Main reason, first episode, so fairly typical. Again, most likely this will not be a regular thing where it will take me 20 plus minutes to do an episode review, but it's just because it's the first episode. So just understand that now it's only because it's the first episode that this is going to take, that this episode was so long. Like, this is not going to be a regular thing, and don't get me wrong, I know I basically tried to hit everything with this episode, but it's mainly because it's the first episode and there's so much backstory to it. Like, it's gonna slow down. It's gonna slow down a lot more. It's just that this is the first episode and so much happened. So just be aware that, like, this isn't a regular thing. You know, this is just the first episode, so it's intentionally longer because, you know, it's a new story. It's not like, you know, with Kamen Rider, it's always a new story. It's not the same story at all, so you can't necessarily make assumptions, and usually with the first episode there typically isn't too much filler. It's usually all important content, especially with this. They typically with the first episode have a big amount of backstory. So I'd love to know your guys' opinions. Did you guys enjoy it? I personally did enjoy the episode a lot. I thought it was a really good episode as a whole. Are you planning on getting into it and watching it as well? Have you watched Kamen Rider in the past? I definitely have, and I'd love to know your guys' opinions on this show, if you have had the chance to watch it, or if you're interested in watching it. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.